Hi, everyone. It's Mike Morse. Another episode of Open Mic coming from my house because we are no longer in our offices for the short term, hopefully. Today, we are continuing our discussion about our messed up criminal justice system here in Michigan. I'm excited to have John Cooper, who's an attorney. He's the executive director of Safe and Just Michigan and is responsible for the organization's strategic vision and direction. John's research and advocacy is focused on Michigan's adult criminal legal system with an emphasis on strategies to reduce Michigan's prison population, remove barriers to successful reentry, and increase the use of effective alternatives to incarceration, all things we've talked about here on Open Mic. So let's welcome John Cooper to the show.
You never know who you're going to see.
Be one guy one-on-one my whole career.
What you're going to hear.
Got a lot of desperate people in the city.
Or what they've got to say.
When you can take people inside of a crime.
That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mic. Find it where you find your podcasts.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here. Where are you calling in from? So my viewers and listeners know.
Yeah, sure. So I am, like you, broadcasting from my home. I live in Grand Rapids, which is the city I grew up in. I grew up here, went to Calvin College, which is one of the post-secondary institutions here in Grand Rapids. And then I went to law school at the University of Virginia and graduated about 12 years ago.
So love Grand Rapids, and I'm glad you're here with us today. Before I jump in, tell me what Safe and Just Michigan is.
Yeah, we're a research, policy, and advocacy organization, sort of a combination think tank plus legislative advocacy organization. So I'm the executive director. Prior to taking over last year, I was the policy director here. We also have several outreach and communication staffers. We have a criminologist on staff and a couple folks who support the policy work that I am leading. We're based in Lansing, but we haven't been there since March, due to the pandemic. And thankfully, the legislature has continued working during that time. There's been a bunch of committee hearings over Zoom that we've participated in, and we appreciate the legislature's work in moving many reforms along during this difficult time. It's honestly been a much more productive legislative period than I had any reason to anticipate.
Is Michigan too tough on criminals?
Michigan does not have the best criminal justice policy, but it's not the worst either. I mean, the basic thing that I think folks need to understand is that as currently constituted, our criminal justice system is about punishment, not public safety. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the policies that we as a state have adopted over the last 40, 50 years, the emphasis of them is being tough on crime, which means punishing crime very harshly. But it doesn't do things like help people who get in trouble get back on their feet, get jobs, become, as people like to say, productive members of society. What we do is we hold people's criminal records over their heads for the rest of their lives. And that is really a huge problem because 95% of people who go to prison are released ultimately and are told they need to become productive members of society, but they're not necessarily given the tools to do that. And that doesn't even deal with the many, many people who don't end up going to prison in the first place. I think most people don't understand that only about 20% of felony cases result in any kind of prison time to begin with. And many don't result in any jail time. There's a lot of people running around with criminal records that are 20 years old that have, even at the time, didn't do anything we as a society thought was serious enough to punish with incarceration. But we as a society won't give those people jobs or safe and affordable housing.
So I agree with you that we're probably too quick to throw people into prison, although the statistics sound like it's not as many as some may think. But if there was no prison for the crimes, what's going to deter people from committing crimes?
Well, there's lots to deter people, and it's a criminal justice system thing. But the difference between sending someone to jail for a few weeks and sending someone to prison for a few years isn't that large from a deterrent standpoint.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so there's certain kinds of crime where it's a lack of opportunity. So a person's poor, there's not job opportunities, and if you're not addressing those underlying causes, sending someone to jail for a brief time or prison for a longer time isn't going to fix those problems. It's actually going to make those problems worse because the person has been separated from community supports and is going to be trying to get a job with a felony record instead of, job trainings, other means of support that might actually help a person get on a different path. So I think the problem with a punishment-based system is that it's not addressing root causes. It puts all its eggs in one basket, and that basket is punishing people and assuming that if we're harsh enough with people, they'll behave differently.
So what does Safe and Just Michigan advocate for instead of prison time?
So it's not an either or, it depends on the case. And certainly there are cases where if a person is a danger to society, and they're not willing to change their behavior, some sort of consequence or even prison time is warranted. But the vast majority of the criminal cases in our state do not involve someone who's fundamentally a danger to others in the community. Just one data point, half of all our criminal cases in Michigan are traffic offenses. And the vast majority of those are low-level misdemeanors that many people would argue should not be criminal to begin with. And we're talking in this case about, say, driving with a suspended license. 5% of all licensed drivers in Michigan get their license suspended annually. And 95% of those suspensions are because a person was too poor to pay a fine or fee. And that person's going to be poor after you fine them, after you send them to jail. Then the issue is poverty. It's not public safety at all. It's not, these suspensions aren't even related to a person's driving behavior. It's just they have an outstanding parking ticket or something like that. And there's many, many cases.
Let me make sure I got that statistic right. So you're saying half of the people in Michigan jails are traffic related?
So it's half of all criminal cases, but if you look at the leading causes of admission to jail in Michigan, many of those are traffic. And it's, drunk driving is a major one for sure, but there's several others that are really regulatory crimes. For example, driving with a suspended license is the third leading cause of admission to jail in Michigan.
And I've never had this discussion, John, but what is your thought process? Is jail a deterrent for people driving without a valid license, for drunk drivers who don't injure someone, let's say? Are those deterrents for them not to do it again, or are there better methods for that?
Drunk driving is a tough case because it does involve, in many cases, addiction. But I do think addressing the underlying addiction is more effective than just throwing someone into jail. We see a lot of people with repeat offenses coming through the system. But, drunk driving, I think we can agree, is a risky behavior. And that's not something that we are talking about in most cases with driving with a suspended license. In most cases, that license was suspended because of a person's inability to pay a fine or fee, not the way they drive. And the reality for people in Southeast Michigan, particularly residents of the city of Detroit, is that there's not meaningful public transportation. People need to drive to get to work, to get their kids to school, to go to the grocery store. And they have the need to work and take their kids to school and go to the grocery store, whether or not their license is suspended. So we're putting people in a situation where they have to choose between abiding by the license suspension and meeting their daily needs.
Yeah. I think at least my brain, can see the line, a chronic drunk driver with the addiction. Either they should probably spend some time in jail if they have repeated offenses. Maybe they'll get sober. Maybe they don't want to go back to jail. Maybe they'll think twice before they get into a car drunk again. versus the people driving because they can't afford to renew their license, or they have too many tickets to pay to renew that license. That doesn't seem like a good use of our jails. So that one's, in my opinion, is a little easier.
Yeah.
What are some other things we should be thinking about in this? I mean, the bail organization, the Bail Project, on the podcast.
Yeah.
Fascinating organization. Really grateful that they're here in Detroit now. I think they also do stuff in Grand Rapids, if I'm not mistaken. But they're bailing people out for free.
Yeah.
And they don't have to pay it back. They just have to show up to court, and the money comes back, and they get to give it away. Are you familiar with? I mean, that is a great thing that, and they told me they have plenty of money to get most people out of jail who are sitting there on stupid things with bails under $5,000. I thought, wow, what a great organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'd be easier if we just changed the way we do bail in the first place, but that's for the legislature. But
are you guys working on that?
There's no bills right now, I believe there are bills in right now, but they're not expected to be brought up in committee. I think the hope is that there will be some more activity around bail in the next legislative session, which starts in January. So a couple things to know about bail. So the first thing is that at any given time, about half of the people who are in jail in Michigan, and that's about 8,000 people on any given day, are held pretrial, and the majority of those people are there because they can't pay bail. And bails in the less than $5,000 range, in most cases, are going to be low-level misdemeanors or low-level felonies, and those are in most cases not crimes where we would anticipate that person is a threat to the community if they're not held pretrial. Yet we have a bail system that operates on the assumption that people should have to pay to be released pretrial. And that's not consistent with the Constitution. There's well-established Supreme Court cases that one called Salerno from the 80s you may be familiar with, that says, the presumption should be a PR bond. That is, a person's presumed innocent, they should be released pretrial, absent evidence that they're going to be a flight risk or a threat to the community. And unfortunately, that's not really the way we do bail in Michigan. So the Bail Project, which is housed in the Detroit Justice Center, it's a partner organization of ours that is doing terrific work in the city of Detroit. What they're doing is twofold. First, they're doing a proof of concept for a cash-free bail system. So if you're bailing people out and tracking whether they come to court or not, you can demonstrate that people tend to come to court when they're supposed to, if you choose not to hold them. And this is something we've seen across the country. Appearance rates are over 90% in jurisdictions that have rolled back cash bail. Oftentimes, just having a text message reminder system is enough to get people to court, or most people to court. And the nice thing about that kind of a system is all the negative consequences of pretrial incarceration are avoided. So if you think about, say you're arrested driving home from work, you're driving with suspended license, so you're booked into jail, you can't afford bail. Okay, what happens to your kids, right? If you're in jail for a couple nights, you're not picking them up from school, the school's going to call Child Protective Services. Those kids are going to be taken out of your custody. What happens if you don't show up to your job for a few days? Your employer is not likely to be understanding about that, right? So what we have is a system that detains even low-level people pretrial and blows up their lives with no real obvious public safety benefit. And so we have people driven further into desperation, their families are torn apart, and ultimately there's no public safety justification for it in most of these cases. Now, I mean, there are certainly cases where, I'm thinking of stalking cases or domestic violence cases in particular, where there may be greater reasons to try and detain somebody. But driving with a suspended license, many of these other low-level offenses, there's just the factual basis for detention really isn't there. if what you're looking at is public safety, but that's not what folks are looking at. Judges are looking at, can I help fund my court with this bail money? Can I ensure this person's going to show up, because it's a pain in my butt if the person doesn't show up? And those aren't the values that should be animating our criminal justice system. It's just too intrusive.
The statistics that the two young ladies who came in and talked to us were I don't remember them off the top of my head. It was a great episode, but 90% or more of the people are showing up for their court date, right? It's not even their money. Yeah. So bail, traditionally, if you give $1,000 for bail, you want that $1,000 back, so you're going to show up at court, right? That's layman terms. That's basically what it's for. So the bail project, it's not that person's money. It's donors' money. It's my money. It's your money. And these people are showing up, which shows that it's not working the way courts think it is. And the judges who've been there for 20, 30, 40 years are just setting bail, even though they don't need to. So I'm excited that there's going to be some movement next year, John. And I'm throwing my hat in the ring. If you need anything, if you need an advocate to come up to Lansing and talk,
that's great.
I'm volunteering my time.
That's awesome. I think we will probably take you up on that.
So is it true that Michiganders have longer sentences than other states?
Yeah, so we actually do have data on that. That it's not completely current. The best study on it was done 8 or 10 years ago, but it was the Pew Charitable Trust did a study on the length of stay within the prison system, and that's a term of art, but basically it's measuring how long are people actually being incarcerated. Because in Michigan, we have what's called an indeterminate sentencing scheme. So people get a minimum sentence and then a range of years above that. And length of stay actually measures sort of within that range, when is a person being paroled? So like if you get a 5 to 20, are you getting paroled at 5 or are you getting paroled at 20? And historically, Michigan was paroling people long after their first eligibility date. And because of that, and also because of certain sentencing policies that we have sentencing guidelines that are, I think, harsh in comparison to other states, and also a habitual offender law that is very widely used. We're doing some research on that law right now, but the early conclusions are that something like 20% of people who are sent to prison in Michigan are charged habitually. And that's a big number. So what we see is the average length of stay in Michigan's prisons has increased dramatically over the last, say, 25 years. Wow. That is, I should say, in part a product of the fact that some lower level offenders, particularly drug offenders, are not being sent to prison as often. So Michigan had some of the harshest drug laws in the nation in the late 90s, and those were rolled back in 2 phases, first in 98 and then in 2003. But the result of that has actually been that Michigan has a pretty low proportion of drug offenders in the system. Less than 8% of everybody in the prison system in Michigan is serving time for a drug offense.
So that's still a big number, though, 8%. I mean, how many thousands of people is that?
Yeah, so that is going to be a couple thousand people. Right now, we've got about 35,000 people in the system.
Is that down because of COVID?
It's down because of COVID, and it's also down over the last 15 years. And in 2006 and 2007, there were 51,500 people in the prison system in Michigan across almost 50 facilities, and now we're down to 35,000 across less than 30 facilities.
Do we know how many are down because of COVID? I've always been curious. Like, I know they've been letting people out because of they don't want them sick and dying in prison. Do you have any clue on the numbers?
Top of my head, so we were closer to 37, 38,000 before the pandemic. So they're down several thousand, but that's not primarily due to increased paroles. It's actually due to decreased admissions. So they put a moratorium on new admissions to the prison system at the start of the pandemic So folks were being convicted, but they were being held in their local jails and not being transferred to the MDOC because MDOC didn't want sick people coming in, and there was limits. They didn't have the capacity to test everybody in the system. So they are doing some more paroles, but one thing that folks need to understand is that the vast majority of people in the system are not currently eligible for parole. So MDOC only has jurisdiction to consider roughly 15% of the system for parole at any given time. 70% of the people in the system are not eligible for parole consideration because they haven't served their minimum sentence. That's a product of our truth in sentencing law. And then the remaining 15% are serving life sentences, most of them life without parole.
How many people are in the Michigan prison system for marijuana-related offenses? Do we have that number?
We looked into that prior to the ballot initiative legalizing it in 2018, and there were not many. The reality of marijuana is really more when it comes to arrests, admissions to jail, the consequences people who are convicted of a marijuana crime face when looking for jobs. It's not primarily a prison issue. When we looked, there was maybe a dozen or so people serving marijuana offenses in the system. There may be more than that, but there's not a large number. But marijuana possession is one of the 10 leading reasons people go to jail in Michigan, or at least it was prior to legalization.
Yeah, they better not be anymore. So that brings me to expungement.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to give a basic explanation of what expungement is, who's eligible, and what's going on in Michigan, because there's been lots of talk about it. I know your organization is a leader in trying to get more crimes off people's records. Mm-hmm. But let's give a primer to the people who don't know, who are watching and listening, what it is. Sure.
So the basic thing to understand is that the government chooses to keep public criminal records, and that sticks with the person for their entire life. If you committed a crime when you were 17 or 18, and you don't, if you're not able to get that record sealed, that's just going to be following you for the rest of your life. And that's the default position in our system. And we do have a criminal record sealing statute. It was passed in the 1960s, but it's only available to a very narrow range of people with records. And it's actually a very difficult process for the average person to navigate without legal assistance. So the eligibility standards historically have been, you can apply to have your criminal record sealed if you're more than 5 years out from the end of your sentence or community supervision, and you have no more than one felony or 2 misdemeanors on your record, and that's for all time. So if you have a felony when you're 18 and you get driving with a suspended license 3 times over the next 30 years, that felony cannot be expunged. And when we say expunged, what we mean is there's no public record. In Michigan, we have a system where criminal records are set aside or sealed, but they are not erased from law enforcement's purview. So there's always going to be a non-public record of a crime in Michigan. The issue is really, should that criminal record follow you for the rest of your life and show up on background checks when you're looking for a job or looking for an apartment? And we know from research that the vast majority of employers do background checks, and the vast majority of landlords do background checks, and that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the state that are having to deal with the consequences of old criminal records on any given day.
And in order to answer truthfully on a application for whatever it is, you need it expunged legally.
Yep.
So they can answer no. Have you been convicted of a crime? No. You can answer it no if it's been expunged, and if it isn't, it's a crime to answer it no.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so we have this petition process where, if you are eligible to apply, what you do is you gather the certified records of the original conviction, You get a set of fingerprints. You go and file a petition with the court that convicted you, and they do an FBI background check through the state police. They notify the prosecutor, in many cases the victim as well. And then there's a hearing where the judge makes a determination of whether you, based on your behavior since the crime, have earned the right to see your record sealed. And, grant rates for these expungement petitions vary from place to place. I think they're pretty high in Southeast Michigan, but many people are not eligible to apply. We know that roughly 3,000 people a year are able to successfully navigate this process, but we're seeing roughly 50,000 people convicted of felonies every year and many more convicted of misdemeanors every year. So we have in the neighborhood of 2 million people with criminal records in Michigan, and we're only sealing 2,000 to 3,000 a year. And
they usually need a lawyer. It's very hard to do on their own.
Yeah.
And tell me, what kind of felonies? Is every type of felony expungible?
No, there's it's sort of what you'd expect. So no criminal sexual conduct of any kind is eligible. Anything punishable by a maximum of life. So that takes your major sort of violent crimes off the table. And then there's also limitations around repeat offense, domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking. So we're talking about sort of certainly property crimes, your lower level assaultive crimes, and then drug crimes are and of course traffic, because traffic is actually a surprisingly large chunk of the criminal justice system. Although I should say that until the recent expungement reforms passed, traffic offenses were not eligible for expungement.
So tell us about the new laws that passed recently, and did you guys have a hand in that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working on it. It was there's a lot of credit to go around when you pass a big bipartisan reform that's going to help a lot of people. But yeah, we've been involved with it since the start of this legislative session in 2019. There's really two components to this package of bills. The first one is to expand eligibility for the petition process. So as I mentioned, traffic offenses were not eligible to be sealed, and that's a major fraction of the criminal justice system in Michigan. In addition, possession and use convictions for marijuana were given eligibility in light of the ballot initiative. There was a significant expansion in the number of convictions that people can have expunged and can apply for expungement for. And there was also an effort to bring expungement policy more in line with charging practices. So historically, this 1 felony, 2 misdemeanor limit was strictly enforced, even if you have 2 felonies that arise out of the same arrest. Say you're caught with drugs and you get charged with both possession and conspiracy, or intent to distribute. That's 2 or 3 felonies, and you're out of luck historically. So now, if the multiple charges arise out of the same incident, they can be counted as 1 for purposes of those limits.
And is there anything? And this law has been signed.
Yeah, it was signed by Governor Whitmer on October 12. But those eligibility expansions will not become effective until April. I don't know why the legislature chose to do it that way, but I believe it had something to do with the idea that there may be a large number of new petitions filed, and they wanted sort of courts and clerks' offices to have some time to get ready for that.
Did they do anything to make it easier for people to file for an expungement without going through the expense of an attorney?
Yes, and this is actually, in my view, the more important part of the package. They passed what is known as a clean slate bill, and we call that the automatic expungement. And what that says is that if you've stayed out of trouble for 10 years, then your record will be automatically sealed under certain circumstances.
So you don't have to do anything. The person doesn't have to do anything.
That's right. Yeah.
But how is the person watching and listening to this after April, how are they able to check or know? Are they going to get in trouble if they say no to that crime on that next residential application, work application?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I should add that for the automatic expungement, that's not going to affect in April. It's actually got a 2-year implementation period because there are a number of things that need to happen administratively within the state police and the state courts in order to make the automatic expungement possible. So that's going to be effective in October 22. But yes, during the next 2 years, we and others are going to be working on setting up an infrastructure where people can check their status and learn whether their record has been sealed. And we're also going to be doing a lot of outreach and education to make sure people know that this is happening. Because obviously, if they don't know, they're going to keep checking the box. That's creating so many problems for them.
That is a major thing that you're going to be working on, it sounds like. And I think once you get that set up, I think you should come back on open mic and we'll teach the public what they need to do or what they need to check or how they check whether or not their crimes have been expunged so they can then move forward and get housing and get jobs, which is just so important for so many people.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And just to underscore, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are going to get their criminal records sealed. There's estimates that the Detroit mayor's office put into the record during the legislative process that estimate the day the automatic expungement becomes effective, 122,000 people in Wayne County will get their criminal records sealed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like there should be a party that day.
I hope so. And, in many cases, we're talking about old traffic offenses, old marijuana convictions, old low-level stuff that is not the kind of thing that should be holding a person back all these many years later. I mean, one of the things that I think it's important for people to understand about the automatic expungement, it really is focused on the easy cases, old low-level convictions where, if the person went through the trouble of applying through the petition process, those are the cases judges would almost always grant. And, because this petition process is so resource intensive, both for the petitioner and for the courts, it just makes more sense to say, you know what, these are probably going to be granted anyway, let's just grant them. And, this concept, Michigan is the third state that we're aware of to pass this concept. Pennsylvania was the first in 2018. Utah was the second in 2019, and then we followed here in 2020. But our law is significantly broader than the Pennsylvania or Utah laws, which were focused on very low-level misdemeanors. We do have some higher-level misdemeanors and felonies that are eligible here. And we think that'll bring a lot of relief to people.
Great for Pennsylvania to take the lead. One of my new favorite states. Yeah. I'll let you guess why. That and Georgia. Weirdly, I just very pleased with those states these days. But that's great that they took the lead. It feels like Detroiters as well as all Michiganders need this law. Good work, John, for Safe and Just Michigan, getting that passed with all the other organizations that helped you. Please come back when you have more details so we can get the word out, because I think that's probably a pretty tough thing for people to have to, want to work and have to put on their application that they've had a felony 10, 15, 20 years ago, or some low-level misdemeanors that just, thwart their opportunities. And I love that this new law is in effect to help our fellow citizens get back on track. So kudos to you and your organization. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much. We're really excited about it, and we want to be a model for the rest of the nation. I mean, this is something that it's a problem in every state. It's not just Michigan. I mean, we have our own issues, but the reality is, like, every state has hundreds of thousands of people with criminal records. And we as a society need to do something to clean those up so people can move on with their lives. I mean, there's research, and I'll mention a couple, I think, important data points on this. So there's research that says annually there's $87 billion in lost productivity that arises out of people who are locked out of the labor force or underemployed due to criminal records. And there's research that this was really critical to the Clean Slate campaign. There's research that came out of University of Michigan Law School, where two professors there studied outcomes for people who received expungements in Michigan over, I think it was a 10-year period. And what they found was within the first year of getting those records sealed, those folks on average saw a 23% increase in their personal income and 11% increase in employment rates.
Wow.
We're talking about huge, huge differences in people's lives. And
that's amazing. That's a great.
I mean, and I would ask folks to imagine, I mean, if we had 100,000 people in Metro Detroit see that kind of increase, what would it do for the area? What would it do for communities? What would
the economy, for everything.
Yeah. So, there was widespread support from the business community for these reforms as well. And that was, I think, significant in helping get them done. But, for those that might be skeptical sort of about the public safety side of this, I think it's really important that folks know the professors that did this University of Michigan study also looked at recidivism rates. And what they found is that people whose records are sealed, and again, these are people that have stayed out of trouble for 5 years or more, those people commit crimes at a rate equal to or less than members of the general public. So what we're seeing is that these folks are not more likely to commit a crime than a member of the general public, but until their records are sealed, they're being treated as if they are. And that's a real problem from a productivity and opportunity standpoint.
So April it goes into effect, but it may take a couple of years till people start seeing the automatic expungements. Yeah,
we hope that we'll be able to roll out some of the automatic before the 2-year implementation period is over. But ultimately, that's up to the administration and the speed at which the system can be built. What's going into effect in April is expanded eligibility for the traditional petition process. And I do hope folks will look at that. But as you mentioned, it is a process that's challenging to navigate. And we don't see, thousands and thousands of expungements granted every year. And that's why we need the automatic.
Do you have resources on safeandjustmi.org that people could do this themselves? Do you have the forms? Do you have the pleadings that they can pay and go in front of a judge and ask for expungement?
Yeah, we've got resources, and the State Court Administrator's Office has a very helpful form, or two forms. So there's a 2-page form called MC227 that's on their website, and that guides a person through everything they need to do to apply for expungement. And then MC228 is the proposed order that you would hand to a judge to get them to issue if you do successfully navigate the hearing process.
All right. So these will give you step-by-step instructions if you want to get a crime off your record. Sealed is the correct terminology. Yeah. If you go to safeandjustmi.org, we'll put that in our show notes. We'll also try to attach the forms to try to speed up this process if people don't want to wait up to 2 years.
Yeah, I'd encourage anyone who's got eligibility under the current law to apply soon, and for those who will be eligible in April to start getting the documents they need together, because it is historically it's a process that takes 6 to 9 months to navigate, because there are all these sort of administrative tasks that need to happen behind the scenes, from the FBI background check to the review by the local prosecutor. Victim notification needs to happen if there is a registered victim. So getting the process moving sooner rather than later, I would certainly recommend. Even 6 months longer, sort of without access to opportunity, is not good.
Right.
We want people to get going, as quickly as they can.
Well, John Cooper from Safe and Just Michigan, thanks for being on Open Mic today. I learned a lot. I hope others did too. Thank you for all your hard work, and I look forward to either seeing you in Lansing next year fighting for bail reform and other good things, or having you back on the show to talk about expungement or other exciting issues you guys are working on.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much, Mike.
All right, take care.
Yeah, you too.
John Cooper, that was really interesting. So now you know how to get any crimes on your record that don't fall into certain categories expunged. We're going to put all of the information that John talked about in our show notes. Check out his website. It's an impressive website talking about all the things that they're doing. You can donate, you can learn, you can have the resources. If you know somebody with a crime on their record, forward them this podcast. Subscribe to this podcast, like this podcast, comment, tell us other things that you want us to cover, because we're having fun here at Open Mic. We're approaching 100 episodes. We appreciate all of the support that we're getting, all of the watches, all of the listens. Thank you. Grateful for all you listeners and watchers out there, and we'll see you next time.